Welcome back, everyone. We're going to be continuing the discussion on the copper IUD, this time with Jameson, who knows quite a bit about class action law as he's assisted cases in birth control. But before we get into it, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you like this content.
Hey, Jameson, good to see you.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm so excited to meet with you today. Jameson's a good friend of mine, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you know quite a bit about the IUD, and I'll let you tell them why.
I do know a shocking amount about IUDs, and that's because I work in relation to IUDs. I can't go into too many specifics, but I have worked as a third-party investigator with a team of attorneys and nurses, and we would review people's cases who were trying to file suit against pharmaceutical companies for damages that had occurred after they received their IUDs. Mostly we worked with cases that were going against pharmaceutical companies and not necessarily doctors, the pharmaceutical companies themselves that made them. And so I worked on a number of cases.
That's very cool. And yeah, when I was going through healing from my copper IUD for the first time, I had opened up to friends, and Jameson knew exactly where I was coming from. And it made me feel so much less crazy for everything I'd been going through, because you knew so much about what women had to go through with a different type of birth control. And I know you can't talk about everything, but it is very important to me that that we have this kind of vague conversation to make it aware for other people that they aren't crazy either. And also to clarify, just what it would take to sue a pharmaceutical company.
It's not a small or easy feat, but I'm glad you felt less alone after talking about it. That's a common thing that I ran into in doing this research and help setting up these cases, was that so many women found or felt like they were crazy, like they were alone, they were suffering this all on their own, and oftentimes their doctors wouldn't agree with them or tell them that even the possibility existed that they would have any of these side effects from getting their implants or their devices.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Because I was just feeling like, my doctor doesn't understand. I feel like my friends don't believe me. I feel like my partner doesn't always know exactly if this is real or not, and yeah, you just feel kind of crazy when you're on birth control, I guess.
Yeah, especially when you have everyone around you and even your medical professionals telling you that it's not this thing, it's not your birth control.
Yeah.
But it turns out it kind of often is.
Yeah.
I think it's really great that you're doing this and trying to get word out, because a lot of people do feel really alone. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the lawsuits that I was a part of we were having to work with the heirs of an individual, because so many people would feel so alone and feel so crazy and get depression that there was a good number of people who ended up committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to work very closely with their family members, and seeing those were heartbreaking stories. I mean, all of them are heartbreaking, but
yeah,
those people consistently said that they felt like, they were complaining about being alone. Mm-hmm. And feeling alone and feeling crazy, mm-hmm. because they knew that something was wrong with them, and everyone around them was telling them that there wasn't anything wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially when you go on social media and you see these doctors that are like, copper toxicity, that's not real.
What?
Side effects, there's none. And you look at the Paragard commercial, it's like, there's hardly any side effects. Don't worry about it. It's great. There's nothing wrong. And
you might get sleepy every once in a while.
Yeah. Just downplay it, And then you look at these copper groups of thousands of women and the symptoms of copper toxicity, and you're like, how can they be so blind? This is real.
Yeah. And we also found that so many of these individuals who had the copper IUDs inserted in them, the doctors didn't even know that they should test for a copper allergy before inserting a bunch of copper inside of someone.
Mm-hmm.
Because the pharmaceutical companies who provided it to them, or pharmaceutical reps, would not tell them that they needed to test for an allergic response to copper before implanting somebody with a bunch of copper.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't really fully make sense why they would put a heavy metal inside of somebody for so long and deem it safe for 12 years or 10 years. It's just
put it in, leave it.
Yeah. And doctors aren't even fully aware of the side effects. So that's where it's kind of scary to me. It's like, yeah, you just have to do that on your own. You have to look at the whole pamphlet. You got to do your own DIY there. It's like, but if I come in again and again for various symptoms and doctors can't identify them, but yet they know how to advertise them and put them in people, that's where I'm like, there's a huge disconnect there.
Yeah, I found that over and over again in my notes. And when the research was that doctors didn't know of any side effects because they weren't told about them from their pharmaceutical rep. And so doctors just didn't know. They didn't do their research. They didn't care. And so if somebody comes in and complains of them, they would say, well, it's not on the sheet listed that this is a side effect, so it can't be that. And it was kind of a frustrating, heartbreaking thing to see over and over again. If it's not told to you by the pharmaceutical company what is and is not likely to happen, then the doctors are just going to not think about it.
Right. And how do they get away with that? Because there is a huge amount of side effects that the copper IUD has, but the Paragard website only lists a few different ones. Just, and downplays like all of them.
There are stringent standards for what you have to go through in order to get a device out on the market, but maybe those standards aren't always enforced. Maybe. I think that's about all I can say.
Because of money. Because it doesn't make money to talk about it. Why would they?
I like to believe that maybe some of the people who are working at these organizations like have hearts and really do care, because there are people who really do want to help and provide safe, effective, low cost, non-intrusive or minimally intrusive birth control. I think a lot of people really have that drive to want to do that. The people who decide to push it to market and when something is actually ready are maybe not the people who are doing the work and have the hearts of gold. But the people who are in charge of those large companies get to choose when something is pushed through. And that always involves a lot of money.
Yeah.
I don't think that they generally have hearts of gold.
Definitely. What did you find in your whole experience, like working in this realm? If there's anything else you can share there.
Yeah, I learned quite a lot in working through these cases. So let me give you a little bit of a story about what the process was and where I was involved in it. So if somebody has an injury, say they are injured by a car getting hit, they want to bring suit against the person who was driving the car. Much the same way people who are getting these medical implants want to bring suit against the people who are making it and pushing it to market. And so they would get the implant, figure out that maybe this is what it is, and then go to talk to an attorney. The attorneys would then gather a little bit of information and then give it off to me and my team. And we would do research like getting all the medical records. We would go through the medical records, review them to see what sort of case we could build for each person. And we ended up with a 49-page sort of interview questionnaire that we would go through. And we would call up all of the individuals and go through with them on the phone. There's at least 2 hours of answering questions about symptoms, side effects. And we would have in-depth conversations about what these symptoms and side effects were, when they started, what they tried to do to fix them, what their doctors would say. And we got to read all the doctor's notes. So we got very intimate with these people. And a lot of people would open up very easily because it was the first time somebody was giving any sort of validity to their complaints. And somebody was finally listening to them. Instead of a doctor trying to get them out, we would sit there and talk to them. I remember one woman, we had a 6-hour phone chat the first time because she just had so much she wanted to say. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot by listening, as we generally do. From my perspective, it felt like there wasn't a lot of care put into these products, or a lot of research put into what long-term effects might be. And there was a lot of combativeness when people would point a finger at them. No one likes having a lawsuit brought against them. Pharmaceutical companies certainly don't. And they've got a lot of money. As always, when there's a lot of money involved, you can make things very one-sided. So people trying to bring a lawsuit against pharmaceutical companies or any large corporation are going to have a hard time because they're going up against a lot of money. Lawyers generally don't have a lot of money. People who are just individuals, they don't have millions and millions of dollars to spend on their legal defense team, but these pharmaceutical companies do. Telling people that they're crazy, that these symptoms aren't associated with what they've been given, those were common things. A lot of denials. I still don't think anyone has really come out and said, yes, we recognize that these symptoms can be attributed to our device. I don't know if that's happened at all, actually.
It's really sad.
Yeah.
It's sad that they can just blame the individuals. Oh, these thousands of women, they all just have their own problems.
And it makes sense. If you think about it from their perspective, they have all of the science and money, and they have all the documents and information, and they have all the research. Whereas what do you have? You've just got your symptoms. So it's easy to make you feel like you were crazy. It's easy to point a finger and say, well, you were doing something wrong. This whole pointing a finger at the individual and keeping everyone separated from each other so that people aren't talking and doing this sort of thing, and finding out that maybe there's commonality between people, it makes it easy for the large corporations to shut down any sort of suit against them, any negative light that might be shined on them, by just making the individual feel crazy.
Yeah, it's really sad. I remember you saying they sometimes hired private investigators to follow around people.
Yeah, in my research, there was a couple of instances of people complaining of things like that, where they had been followed, they'd been actually confronted in a couple of cases, or claimed they'd been confronted by individuals after they filed suit. They'd have people coming in and trying to bully them out of it. Directly, in a couple of cases, trying to talk them out of filing suit. Strangers coming to their houses or tracking them down in the grocery store. There was a number of stories that had sort of this common vein of bullying after somebody had filed a suit, that it'd be hard to deny any of these things happen, because there was enough commonality amongst all of these cases. And I heard it over and over and over and over and over, that it seems like that is something that corporations are doing. Just trying to intimidate people to not file suit.
Yeah.
And it seemed like it worked in a couple of cases too. I'm sure there's a lot out there we didn't hear about. I just got to hear from the really brave ones.
I did try to sue Paragard, and they said they would handle all of the legal costs and money, but they also were very complicated too. They wanted me to do 10 pages or 20 pages of just paperwork with all my most private information. And then I still got rejected because I wasn't damaged enough. So
Yeah, you bring up a couple of really interesting points. The first one being the complexity of, I guess, the whole affair and the whole process of getting through a lawsuit against something like this. Like that, it's a very complex and very time-consuming number of steps that you have to go through. And you could do it on your own. Do it on your own. You could fill out the paperwork. You could go to the court. You could pay your fees, and you could, start making demands for information from the company. You could file all of your responses to their 12b6 motions, and you could make sure that you're at all the depositions and you're running all the meetings. You could do that. Most people don't know how, because it's really, really complex. Most people don't even know what a 12b6 motion is, which is a motion to dismiss a case for a lack of any real harm, which is exactly what they would file in response to you filing a claim. So you say, hey, I've been harmed. And they would say 12b6, no, you haven't been harmed, nothing wrong. We didn't do anything. And even if we did do something wrong, like it didn't hurt you. And so you can't bring a case against us. So you could go through all that on your own and try to navigate it. And you get shut down really quickly. So you could go to an attorney like you did. And attorneys have the option of who they're going to represent. So they can say, yes, I'll take your case, I'll take your case, I'll take yours. I'm going to only take these sorts of cases, which means you don't have anyone who's automatically going to represent you. Like you don't have any real way to move forward with this. And a lot of times you can't find an attorney who's going to help you, because attorneys in these sorts of cases only make money if you get an award. They'll take a third only if they win. So they're going to be very selective about who they choose. You don't want to go up against a huge corporation and these millions and millions and millions of dollars that their team of attorneys are going to be putting into fighting your suit, if maybe what you'll win is $20. So they want to be very selective, and that leaves people feeling kind of alone. And that's the beauty of class action lawsuits, because you can start lumping everyone together and everyone who's been similarly harmed. And then attorneys start looking at that and saying, well, okay, that might be worth my time. That might be worth the fight. If there's suddenly a much bigger pool that I'm going to be getting a third of. So class action lawsuits are really a great and empowering tool that we have in this country. And that's mostly what I work with, is class action suits.
Yeah, it's just so irritating to me, because like there was a bunch of people in the Copper group trying to do that, and everybody just kind of got too overwhelmed with it, because it's just like somebody in the group would have to organize it and be the lead, and like nobody wants to be the lead person that's like got the microscope on them.
Yeah, being it's called the named plaintiff in cases. You do have to have one person who actually files the suit on behalf of all of the class members. And that person does get heavily scrutinized. There's something about their personal life that they maybe didn't share with individuals that comes to light that could harm the entire class. It couldn't throw the whole case out. And that's discouraging to a lot of people. And it's not easy to get named plaintiff. And normally you do it for the additional benefit of like $5,000, which a lot of it is taken up in attorney's fees. So a lot of people aren't really eager to stand up and say, yes, I'm willing to lead this.
Yeah, it's intimidating.
It really is.
Yeah, I mean, so I have some stats too. Like there's been 170 million people with the IUD implanted. Since 2000, there have been 70K Mirena lawsuits, but I couldn't find the information on Paragard lawsuits, and I know there's many of those.
And you bring up another good point here. It is really hard to find it, because for a lot of reasons, but the main ones being you only can search for lawsuits that have actually been filed. And you tried to file a lawsuit, right? You worked with attorneys. You went through a lot of very intimate stuff to try to file a suit, and you never filed a suit. So if I tried to find numbers on yours, you would not be represented anywhere. The people who get involved in a class that they bring suit, but then maybe there's a settlement agreement before the case goes to trial. A lot of those settlement agreements will have clauses within them that take them out of any research that you might find that would represent these numbers. So class size ends up getting put under a dark little cloak, and so does all of the admissions from the company. A lot of things that I can't talk about are because I was involved with these class actions, and these settlement agreements are very sort of strict about what you can and cannot say, and what is counted and not counted against this pharmaceutical company. It's going to be really hard to find the numbers. I think it's impressive you can find 70,000. I imagine there's a lot more out there.
How are they still putting this in people if they know it's not going well?
No one has, I don't think any pharmaceutical companies have admitted to there being any connection. And so, well, they just keep doing it because they can't.
Money?
I mean, the minds of pharmaceutical companies are just mysterious things to me that I will never understand. But if I had to take a guess, probably say money had something to do
Yep.
with it.
It's such an unfortunate thing, because I feel like, people matter more.
The thing about money and power is no one ever really wants to give it up, or quietly or gently. These people have a lot of both. And they're not going to give it up quietly or easily or gently. So people who've been harmed aren't going to get paid back unless they put up a fight and make a lot of noise. But there's power in the collective, and power in the group. If there's a lot of you coming together and working towards the same goal, like it's really easy to overpower even the largest of companies. And that's, once again, I think this is a really beautiful thing you're doing because of that. Just like unions did, getting weekends or 5-day work weeks or 40-hour work weeks for workers. if you're coming together and acting together, you can get a lot more done. And first step to doing that is bringing people together.
Totally.
You brought up something earlier that I wanted to touch on that I didn't really bring up, but the paperwork you had to fill out before you could file a lawsuit. You had to talk about how you'd been injured, like what was wrong with you because of getting this implant, right? Those things are very intimate. And like the questionnaires we ended up with developing were, like I said, 49 pages. And they get very intimate because you do need to talk about these intimate things, like what has happened to you, like what is wrong with you, like how often do you have sex with your spouse or your significant other? What's the sex like? What is your interest in sex? Like all of these questions that people don't really want to talk about, or like talking about discharge or talking about frequency of periods. It's a thing that's hard for a lot of people to talk about and hard for a lot of people to put down on paper too, especially in varying groups of people across the country. Like you have different religious organizations, different cultural, ethnic groups that feel differently about talking to strangers about things like this. So a lot of people are discouraged from ever doing anything about it because they don't even want to talk to their doctor about it, let alone talk to some strangers and have it put into court documents where the state can read it.
Totally. Yeah. It's really mysterious too. There's like a common issue in the copper group that women have trouble having doctors take it out. Like a lot of doctors don't want to take it out and they don't believe that copper toxicity is a thing, or they just don't want to take it out. And I talked to like a physician assistant about that, and he was saying, that's really weird. I haven't really heard of that. And I didn't have a problem with that, but I also went to like immediate care, and that was the only reason I was there. And I was like, get this thing out of me right now. But yeah, there's a lot of women that have issues with that. And I wonder if you know anything about that, like why doctors are hesitant. Are they worried that they will be sued? Or, if it's broken or something when they take it out, they could be liable? Or if you know anything about that, it's very...
I mean, a lot of it is conjecture, and so I couldn't speak to why they would feel the way that they feel. But as I mentioned earlier, we would do medical record review. So I would look through all of these medical records and get to read all of the doctor's notes. And so I can take some pretty good educated guesses here. A lot of times the doctors just didn't believe that there was anything wrong with the person, that there was no reason why getting copper implanted in you would cause any sorts of problems. Even if they had confirmed that there was an allergic reaction to copper and they had implanted copper into somebody, the doctors would still have a hard time believing that there was any correlation. So I think that's a big one. Also, it's a complicated thing sometimes getting these devices out, especially if there's been breakage of the device inside. Sometimes there's one type that can wind itself out of the fallopian tubes and be free floating in the body, and you have to track it down first.
No thanks.
Yeah. So I'd say the big thing is that doctors just don't know enough to identify that it is a problem. And then they don't really know enough to feel confident in making that decision that taking it out is going to be a good thing. And so they don't recommend these things that they're not really sure about. And that lack of understanding all goes back to how they're pushed to market and how they get pushed on doctors too by pharmaceutical reps.
Totally.
There's not a lot of understanding.
And do you know anything about like why doctors don't have to be trained on the side effects? They don't have to know them by heart, but yet they can know all the different birth controls by heart and advertise them and sell them to people and put them in.
So the doctors do have to know certain things about any device that they're pushing, but there's no requirement for them to be experts.
Even if it's like an OBGYN?
On a specific device, no requirement that they have to be experts.
This is important information for everybody because it's not like your doctor actually has to be a specialist.
Right. It can just be that the guy who is coming to their office telling them about their devices from their company played a better golf game than the guy from another pharmaceutical company who came out and is pushing their devices. And so that's why you end up with your doctor having one versus the other is this golf swing of these pharmaceutical reps. It can be as ridiculous and silly as that.
Man, I didn't know how it works behind the scenes, but I guess that's how it goes sometimes.
Pharmaceutical reps and the problems associated with that whole industry, very interesting. Something worth looking into. They're pretty tied up in these problems, a lot of these issues.
Right. Yeah. And I know there's been times where people have mentioned questionable things about, IUDs or birth control, and certain doctors decide to stop selling them and stop putting them in people and stop recommending them and recommend against them. So I know it can also be the opposite effect if enough patients are vocal and make it known, and there's a moral person on the other side who's a doctor.
And there's also just dope doctors out there who do research before ever agreeing to any sort of pharmaceutical rep coming into their office, who do their due diligence and they know about the products they're putting in. Some people make it their personal mission to become an expert on anything that they are possibly going to push on somebody else. There's some really dope doctors out there.
Yeah, totally. I know that some doctors have been changed by my experience, so I do think that it's important for all of us to not only be vocal about what's going on, but to be vocal about all silent illnesses that happen to a lot of people.
Yeah, just good life advice. You never know what somebody else is going through. So treat everyone with kindness.
Totally, yeah.
And especially your partner. I saw so many instances where people would treat their partners as if they were crazy because they didn't know what was going on with them. And it's a really alienating thing to go through.
Totally. Yeah, there were accounts that I was hearing through podcasts and different people talking about their stories that their partners were about to leave them, or there were a lot of like suicidal kind of people on that group. And yeah, it's really crazy. Like this is an important time to build a support system and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, it's always important important to have a good support system and take care of each other.
Yeah. And even if you can't see the problem, like trust that it's actually a problem, you know?
I think that's a fair point to make.
Totally. Well, thank you so much, Jameson. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to see you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm so happy that we could do this.
And I'm glad you're recovering.